Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for coming to the VolitionRX Ltd. corporate presentation here at the Noble Financial Conference. Again, this is VolitionRX Ltd., ticker VNRX on the NYSE American Stock Exchange. I'm Scott Powell. I'm the head of investor relations, and I'm the U.S. Chief Financial Officer for the company. And would like to point you to our obligatory forward-looking statements and disclaimer slide. Just a reminder that I will be making some forward-looking statements today, and those statements may or may not be realized in the future. A little bit about Volition. We are an epigenetics company. We are developing blood tests to screen for a variety of different disease states, primarily in oncology, but we are also looking at applications that are outside of oncology. This is a bit about our platform. There are essentially 5 pillars to the Volition technological and science platform. They all start with Nucu, which is an acronym for nucleosome quantification, and that's one part of our technology which involves the quantification, so actually quantitatively measuring the amount of nucleosome debris, which are chromosome fragments in a person's or animal's bloodstream. So Nucu there on the top left, that's our human health clinical studies in oncology. We're clinical stage looking at colorectal cancer, lung cancer, and 2 bloodborne cancers. Moving to the center, Nucuvet. This is commercial stage. Some of you may have seen the recent press release from a couple weeks back. We signed a $28 million licensing deal with Heska Corporation. And they are going to be one of our exclusive partners for commercializing and selling our Nucuvet blood test, which is a blood test to screen for 2 common canine cancers in dogs. Nucleocapture, that's essentially our research and development division. That's where most of our patents are housed. And that's where we work through, look at developing new potential products, look at different biomarkers, look at different applications, and sort of where our technology may fit vis-a-vis other existing technologies, or in many cases solving some existing problems when it comes to the current diagnostics market. Nucunets, there on the bottom left. This is our first movement into non-oncology based disease states. We're looking at the ability to triage patients after they've been confirmed infected with COVID-19 and or sepsis. And Nucu Discover on the bottom right, that's really our third-party service platform. We have 2 facilities in Belgium. We have a 20,000 square foot office building. I think there's a picture of it here. I guess we've taken it out of the deck for this quarter. But we have a 20,000 square foot office building and laboratory just south of Brussels, and then we purchased another 10,000 square foot manufacturing facility with the purpose of providing sample processing services, antibody production to other mostly European-based diagnostics or pharmaceutical companies, and hopefully start to ramp revenue from Nucu Discover over the course of 2022 and beyond. Most of you are probably interested in Nucuvet because that is where we are commercial stage. So I'll skip right over to Nucuvet. The brand name is the Nucuvet Cancer Screening Test. And you can see the results from the studies here. We formed a partnership with Texas A&M University in 2019, and we granted Texas A&M University a 12.5% equity ownership stake in our wholly owned veterinary subsidiary, Volition Veterinary Diagnostics Development, LLC. In return, Texas A&M ran several studies in canines. You can see from the third bullet point. It included over 330 dogs, and we had strong results for flagging canines with lymphoma and hemangiosarcoma. 97% specificity, that's your false positive rate, so you subtract that from 100, it gives you 3% false positives. So almost no false positives in that study. Sensitivity, you can see, was 77% for lymphoma, 82% for hemangiosarcoma. That's your false negative rate. So we accurately flagged 77% of canines that had canine lymphoma as positive, missing 23%, and accurately identified 82% of canines with hemangiosarcoma, again missing 18%. These results and the fact that there does not currently exist a accurate, inexpensive, convenient screen to test for cancer in canines led us to signing a licensing deal with the Heska Corporation about 3 weeks ago. It's a $28 million licensing deal. We already received $10 million. The full $28 million is non-dilutive, so there's no equity being issued for that. There's no equity being granted to Heska. It's $28 million in payments. Like I said, $10 million was received a few weeks ago. The other $18 million will be received in tranches. There's a little bit more about Heska and Volition here. Of the $18 million remaining, $6.5 comes upon launch of this product by Heska. Another $6.5 million will come upon launch for the second intended use, which is for cancer monitoring in canines. And then I don't believe we've disclosed the milestone to trigger the last $5 million in payments from Heska. But this is a very significant opportunity for us. It is a validation of our technology on one hand by a major company in the animal health space, Heska Corp, and should provide us with substantial revenue going forward. We've disclosed publicly that we're getting $10 per test that Heska sells through their reference labs. So Heska does both. They do point of care, so there's a machine that a veterinarian can use to take a blood sample from a canine at the veterinary clinic, get the results in around an hour. The blood sample could also be sent to Heska's reference lab for processing. For instance, if there's 10 or 15 different, or 5 or 10 or 15 different blood tests being run at the same time on that canine, probably would just send it off to the reference lab so all the tests could be analyzed from the same blood sample. We're getting $10 for reference lab sales, and we're getting less than that for point of care sales. We have not disclosed what that figure is. But we have disclosed publicly that we expect Heska to be selling millions of tests either next year or the year after when they're sort of get their sales force educated and when we are able to supply them with the antibodies for the test. So really excited about this. It's a significant amount of non-dilutive capital for Volition, and we expect a significant amount of revenue to be generated from Heska sales of our blood test for canines. You can see a little bit more about the deal here. So we granted Heska exclusivity on point of care and non-exclusive on reference lab. And you can see a bit about the deal there. We also signed a smaller deal with Sage Healthcare out of Singapore in December of last year. We have not disclosed the details of that agreement. And we've announced publicly that we are still speaking with other partners about potential licensing deals. So these would obviously be on the reference lab side since we did give Heska exclusivity on the point of care. So just backing up a little bit to the opportunity here in animal health, I want to emphasize how important this product launch is both for Volition as a company in terms of non-dilutive cash payments, future revenues, but also there's a major problem that we along with Heska are hoping to solve in canine health. There are 77 million canines in the U.S. 6 million of those are diagnosed with cancer every single year, so almost 10% of canines in this country are diagnosed with cancer every year. That is surely an undercounting of the actual number of cancers because many canines will pass away without a confirmed cause of death. So the number is probably a lot higher than 6 million. The problem, though, is those 6 million canines diagnosed with cancer annually, the vast majority of those canines are diagnosed. Why? Because they're first sick, they're symptomatic, and then you take your canine to the vet, and then typically the confirmatory diagnostic tests involve imaging technologies and or biopsies. So the x-rays, CAT scans, MRIs, and so forth, and or biopsies of particular organs of the animal. And of course, when the results come back positive and your canine has been sick for a while, it's probably a late-stage cancer, right? So it's a stage 3, stage 4 hemangiosarcoma or lymphoma or other cancer type. And unfortunately, at that stage, you don't have a lot of good options, right? First option is to euthanize your canine, right, to put it down. Horrible option for a canine owner, particularly if the canine is 12 or 14 years old. Other option is to spend hundreds, probably thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars on treatment. So drugs, surgeries, lab visits, testing, chemo, et cetera. And that can run, I've heard in some cases, $25,000, $35,000 to treat your canine with a late-stage cancer. And you're probably only going to be extending its life by a few months, and it may be suffering. So you really don't have a lot of good options on the symptomatic side of the equation. Why do canines not get screened asymptomatically? Because you only have those two tools, imaging technologies and biopsies. Both are very expensive. You're not going to take your 5-year-old German Shepherd into the vet for a wellness check and ask your veterinarian to do all kinds of x-rays and scans and biopsies to see if your 5-year-old German Shepherd has cancer. It would cost you thousands of dollars to do that. So it's not done. So there currently is no screening asymptomatically for cancer in canines. Canines simply do not get screened currently asymptomatically for cancer. For the first time now they can. With this HESCA deal, we're also selling through Texas A&M University. So it's available for purchase at Texas A&M on their website, and it's also shortly available for purchase through HESCA. In fact, if you go to the front page of HESCA's website, they just put our blood test on the front page of their website, advertising it for sale. So we're really excited about that opportunity. So now for the first time, because HESCA is selling this blood test to vets for about $25, vets are expected to sell it to canine owners for $50. For the first time now, there's an accurate, inexpensive, easy to use, because it's point of care as well as reference lab, test to screen canines asymptomatically for cancer. Age 7 is the age at which canines become more predisposed to cancer. So ideally what will happen is if you have a 7-year-old German Shepherd or Labrador or whatever breed it is, and it's asymptomatic but going in for a wellness check, and they're running blood work, they can just add the HESCA Volition blood test on as an additional test. It's $50 extra, and you can find out if your canine has cancer while it's still asymptomatic. The advantage, of course, is if it comes back positive, it's much more useful to spend money on imaging technologies and biopsies, because if your canine does have cancer and it's asymptomatic, it's likely a precancer or an early stage. Therefore, you have a lot more treatment options that are a lot less expensive and much more efficacious. So I think the statistic is if your canine is undergoing treatment for cancer while it's still asymptomatic, I think the drugs, the treatments are something like 85% more effective than if you have a 12-year-old symptomatic or sick canine, because at that stage the canine's immune system has been weakened or compromised, so the treatments, the drugs aren't nearly as effective once the canine is symptomatic. So this is really significant opportunity for us, of course, for HESCA as well, and for the first time now, we'll be able, all of you who own dogs will be able to get your canine screened for cancer at a very attractive price point. So we're going to end up saving a lot of canines' lives, reducing a lot of pain and suffering for canines, and most likely making a lot of money at the same time for Volition and for our shareholders. So I know I've spent a lot of time on this product, but I think it's important to do so. And just mindful of time, I'd like to focus next on Nucuvet. As I mentioned earlier, this is our first movement into non-oncology based disease states. We're looking at a risk stratification analysis for patients that have already been confirmed infected with COVID-19 or sepsis. So the challenge here is that when a patient is infected with sepsis or COVID-19, neither patient nor doctor has any way to predict whether or not that patient will have a really severe reaction to infection. I mean, unless they're already really, really sick and highly symptomatic, there's no way, there's no tool that doctors have to predict whether or not these patients will progress to really severe symptoms of sepsis or COVID-19. So, for instance, with COVID-19, if you test positive for COVID-19, yet you have mild symptoms, you're sent home from the lab or you just stay at home, And then if you get really, really sick, you then call your doctor or go to the hospital and get yourself checked into the hospital for, for oxygen. With sepsis, there's no way to know which patients will have a really severe reaction. And sepsis is the #1 killer in hospitals, as many of you probably know. So what happens when a person is infected with COVID-19 or sepsis, and many other pathogens for that matter? You can see from the diagram here, a normal reaction is when you're infected with a pathogen, your body, your white blood cells inject nets or neutrophil extracellular traps into your bloodstream. And you can see from the diagram on the right, it kind of forms a spider web or a net. And the job of nets, of the neutrophil extracellular traps, is to envelop, neutralize, poison, and kill the invading pathogens. For reasons unknown, and there's a bit more of a description here. You can see that the white blood cells migrate to the infected tissue. They try to engulf the invading pathogens, produce antibodies. They produce cytotoxic proteins. For reasons unknown, in certain individuals, their bodies overproduce nets. And there's a significant buildup of nets. And you can see from the 4th bullet point, what happens is tissue damage can occur when there's overproduction of nets. And you can see it can also cause blood clots. It can also cause organ failure. It can cause the immune system to become compromised. We don't know why certain individuals' bodies go into nets overdrive. We do know, however, that that's what kills a person from a sepsis infection or a COVID-19 infection. So our technology does this so far. What we're able to do is we're able to quantify the amount of nets in a person's bloodstream post-infection with COVID-19 or sepsis. Not only can we quantify that, but there's a very, very strong linear correlation between the quantity of nets in a person's bloodstream and the severity of symptoms from COVID-19 or sepsis infection. People who were asymptomatic with sepsis or COVID-19 had about 20 nanograms per microliter of nets in their bloodstream. Those with moderate had, was in the thousands of nanograms per microliter, and those who had really severe reactions. In fact, 2 of the patients who died from COVID-19 infections had over 20,000 nanograms per microliter of nets in their bloodstream. Our test measures this very accurately. There's a very strong correlation. What we don't know, and this is the most important question, is we know we can measure nets. What we don't know is how far in advance of the onset of severe symptoms does the body overproduce nets. So in other words, if you're infected with COVID-19 and then 3 days later your body overinjects nets into your bloodstream and then you're immediately sick, we don't have a window of opportunity to test you. However, if there's a lag time of 12, 24, 36, 48, 72 hours between the body's overproduction of nets and the time that you get really, really sick, there's a window of opportunity there to triage that patient. So this could be a serial test. So in other words, if you're infected with COVID-19, asymptomatic, you're sent home, and you would either do a self-test every day, for instance, to monitor your nets level, and if all of a sudden you're at 5 or 10,000 or 20,000 nanograms per microliter, you're going to head right to the hospital to get onto a ventilator, oxygen machine, whatever, you get a hospital bed, whatever the treatment protocol would be. And so this could be a serial test over the course of the entire infection of sepsis or COVID, and it would essentially serve as a monitoring or a risk stratification tool. So we're running longitudinal studies in the UK right now just to find out how much of a lag time there is. Hopefully there's enough of a lag time where this could be a very, very useful product, because this would be the only product of its kind that would be able to monitor the amount of nets in a person's bloodstream. So really excited here. Again, a huge unmet opportunity in the market for this. I don't think I have time to talk about the human oncology programs, but you can see a little bit here, NuQ cancer. We are working in colorectal, lung, and bloodborne cancers. I'll talk maybe about colorectal for a couple minutes, and then I'll open it up for questions. And I won't have time to talk about lung or bloodborne cancers, but with colorectal cancer, where We have clinical studies. We've completed clinical studies in Denmark. We have ongoing clinical studies in Taiwan at National Taiwan University, and we have an ongoing study here in the U.S. with the National Cancer Institute. With colorectal cancer, it's an interesting problem. We have a very accurate diagnostic tool. The colonoscopy is the tool recommended in the United States for every adult over age 45 who's asymptomatic without a family history. They're supposed to have a colonoscopy once every 10 years if they're asymptomatic. The problem is one of compliance. People don't comply with their screening obligations. Not enough Americans comply and get a colonoscopy for obvious reasons. The other alternative is to complete a fecal test. Some of you have heard of Cologuard from Exact Sciences. There's also the FIT and FOBT tests. All four of those tests suffer from compliance problems because they're unpleasant tests. So people just don't do them as often as they should, and sometimes never get tested for colorectal cancer. This is a problem because colorectal cancer is asymptomatic in the early stages, and so if you turn 45, you never have that colonoscopy or fecal test, you're 55, 65, then suddenly you're symptomatic, and you finally go for that colonoscopy, say at age 65, and it's positive for colorectal cancer, you're probably stage 4, and you'll be dead in 5 years, or less than 5 years. So this is a big problem. Modality is the issue. A blood-based test largely obviates the compliance problem because most of us would say yes to a simple blood test for colorectal cancer, while many of us might say no to a colonoscopy. So huge opportunity for us in all these verticals, really, with VET, with Discover, with the third-party sample processing and service, with NETs, again, a huge unmet need, and obviously in human cancers, there's huge opportunity as well. So we have a lot of shots on goal. Our stock did not react appropriately, in our opinion, to the HESCA announcement because the markets have been really challenging in 2022, I think because of inflationary concerns in the Ukraine. Wrapping up here on key financials, our ticker again, VNRX. Market caps hovered between 150 and 250 million over the past year or so, 52-week range, you can see. Burning about 2 million per month. We finished full year 2021 with 20.6 million in cash. That you would subtract 3 months of burn, or 6 million, and then add 10 million from the HESCA deal, and then another 18 million hopefully coming in the next 1 to 2 years, and then revenue coming from sales of the veterinary product. 5 analysts cover the company: Maxim, Aegis, Benchmark, Cantor Fitzgerald, and Zacks. Strong insider ownership, management team and the board. We own about 17.5%. Institutions have about a third, 35% or so of the shares. Very clean cap structure. Around 52 million shares out basic, around 55 million fully diluted. The delta there is only management stock options. We have, I think, maybe 100,000 warrants left on the cap table, so essentially no warrants. A little bit of straight debt, no convertible debt, no preferred shares, no equity lines. We do have an ATM with Cantor Fitzgerald and an effective S3 for $100 million. Volition, www.volition.com is the website. You can see right there. Hopefully all of you will continue to follow our progress over the course of 2022 and 2023. I apologize for speaking quickly in the last few minutes, but I did want to cover a lot of ground and see if there's any time for questions. Yes, sir. Yeah, Cologuard is 9287 sensitivity and specificity, so 8% false negatives, 13% false positives. FIT is about 70, 90, so about a 30% false negative rate. So we're in between. Our clinical studies have shown sensitivity and specificity in the high 70s. On the sensitivity side, 78 to 90%. On the specificity side, about 82 to 90%. So about 10 to 20% false negatives and false positives. So not quite as accurate as Cologuard, but we're more accurate than FOBT and FIT. The other thing to note is our clinical studies have shown good accuracy for precancerous polyps as well as stage 1 colorectal cancer. And our price point, we can price this at $100. Cologuard is about a $600 test. So even if we priced at $300, theoretically a person could take our blood test twice for every one Cologuard test. So assuming we don't have the same false negatives in year 1 and year 3, our aggregate accuracy would be higher just because of the 2 bites at the apple, assuming we don't have the same false negatives in test 1 and test 2. Yes, sir.
How would you express your strategy for growth?
Largely through licensing deals. We don't want a big sales force. We have a licensing deal with HESCA, a licensing deal with Sage that we signed in December. We're actively talking to other partners about potential licensing deals. Our cost of goods, I didn't mention, is very low. Our cost of goods is under $5 for all of these products. So we have a lot of margin. We have opportunity to partner with other players that have big sales forces, have already penetration of other products, and we can share some of that profit with them because of our cost of goods being so low. I think that's all the time we have, but I'll be outside if anyone wants to chat further. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the conference.